Namaskar and welcome to one more episode of What Does This Data Say? I am Ajay Prakash. In today's episode, I'm going to talk about a disturbing trend which is getting more and more prevalent in our country, especially as we are getting close to the next general elections. Now, this is all about some kind of data which is being thrown in the public domain, which is not necessarily true. The disturbing fact is when the government starts releasing such information, which I won't say is fake, but it's definitely far away from the truth. When the government releases such data or stories, the media today, being what it is, laps it up and then starts publicizing it. It then goes over to the electronic media, from there on to the social media, and then the so called Bhat make sure that it reaches their target audience. The audience today, being not so much aware of what this is all about, start believing in these figures that ultimately benefits the ruling party. I could point out many such instances, but then today I am going to focus on one such incident which happened 2 or 3 days ago. I'm going to counter this story which was published in the press a few days ago by showing you the data from the Reserve Bank of India and from where exactly the numbers were picked up and what they should have been rather than what they have been shown as. So stay with me because this is going to be a very interesting episode. Suddenly, a few days ago, one finds these headlines appearing in the electronic media. They were almost identical. It read as India's per capita income doubles under Modi government. The story was identical. Everyone published it without giving a thought to it. In fact, one of the electronic newspapers, Z Business, did some cut paste to the story and then put one paragraph below the headline which contradicted the headline itself. In doing so, the newspaper never realized what it is really saying. I'll just read that paragraph. It says former director of the Premier Economic Research Institute NIPFP Pinaki Chakrabarti said that the Global Development Indicator database shows that India's real per capita income increased on an average at a rate of 5.6% each year from 2014 to 2019. So when the national income grew only at 5.6% per annum, then how is it possible that the per capita national income doubled during the Modi period from 2014 to 2022? In fact, I'll show you one table which will make things very clear. If one had 100 rupees in the year 2014 and he invested it in a bank which gave him an interest of 5.6% per annum, then that amount becomes almost 1.5 times after 7 years in 2021 and doubles in 2026 when that amount becomes 203 rupees. So at a 5.6% interest rate, the amount doubles in 12 years. Strangely, though, this report claims that the per capita national income doubled between 2014 and 2022. Now, before I show you the full report and then the data to counter the figures in that report, I want to point out two things. Firstly, if the period under consideration is 2014 to 2022. Now, during this period, you all must be recollecting that we had some major setbacks. Firstly, there was the demonetization, after which our GDP growth had slipped, and then came the GST implementation. A poor implementation of the GST regime also resulted in a loss to the state exchequer. And then came the pandemic period, almost 2 years of low growth or negative growth. Now, all that put together, it becomes quite surprising that there's a claim that during this period, something which is related to the GDP has doubled. The second point is, which I'm sure you must have noticed, I keep talking of the national income, and that's what is given in this report, and not the gross domestic product or the GDP. Now, we all are very accustomed to hear about the GDP. Our GDP passed $3 trillion last year, and then there are claims of how and when it's going to cross $5 trillion. And then we also keep hearing about the per capita GDP. But national income is a parameter or a measure which is not talked about in public, because the public does not really have a great understanding of this parameter. As you will see later in this episode, I will show you why a such obscure parameter as the national income was chosen to be given in this report. For those people who want to know more about the GDP, there's a link up here which you can click. I did an episode on the GDP and why Indians are not growing richer despite the GDP growing. Now, for those people who don't know about the national income versus the GDP, I'll very quickly explain the difference. The only significant difference between the two is that the GDP is a domestic parameter. That is, the value of goods and services produced within the boundaries of the country are taken for this parameter. So it measures only the domestic production of goods and services, whereas the national income is computed for the nationals of a country, whether they are staying within the country or outside the country, which means that the scale of operation here becomes international, and it highlights contribution of residents and companies who are operating outside the country as well. One would then expect that the gross national income is higher than the GDP. Here I like to point out that it is always the net of is taken for the national income. That means the inflow minus outflows are taken, and in India's case it so happened that the cost of running businesses outside is higher than the returns we get from those businesses. So there is a negative addition to the GDP. So in our case, the gross national income is less than the GDP of our country. The data which I am going to reference in this episode, I have taken from the Reserve Bank of India reports. The RBI brings out a handbook of statistics on the Indian economy every year. I have given the link below, and should you go to that link, you will find this page. And then the individual annual reports can be accessed by clicking on the years given here. They are available from 2022 right up to 2016, and before that, they are available in the RBI archives. A couple of more facts about the GDP. Why I am telling you all this is, once you know the background of how the GDP or the national income is computed and what is the relevance, you will then be able to appreciate how this story has misrepresented the facts. Now, when someone refers to the GDP as being $3 trillion, it is the GDP which we refer to as the current value GDP. That means the prices are taken as on date. For every year, this is computed on a quarterly basis and then summed up for the year. Now, last year, our GDP at current value was $2.71 trillion, and then it was $2 trillion in 2014-15. The yellow bars in this graph represents the GDP at current prices in trillions of US dollars. The current value GDP depends on many factors that are valid only for that year. Things like the inflation rate, the exchange rate between the rupee and the dollar, as well as the banking rates. Current value GDP is never used to do a comparison with the previous years. Whenever one compares the GDP with the previous years, we use what is known as the GDP at constant value. Now, for a constant value, a base year has to be declared, which currently is 2011-2012. So the prices of today are mapped back to the base year, and then the GDP is computed. For instance, the constant value GDP in 21-22 was 1.94 trillion, and in 2014-15 it was 1.69 trillion dollars. The growth of the constant value GDP is far less than what that of the current value GDP, because the effects of inflation have been removed in the constant GDP. So when we talk about the growth of the GDP, it is always the GDP at constant values which is taken, which is the blue line here, and that's how we get the dip of 6.6% in the year 2021, which was negative, and last year our GDP growth was 8.7%. The growth rates are never ever computed using the current value of the GDP. Should that have been the case, the government would be today crying out loud that our GDP has grown by 19.5%, which is a ridiculous figure. And then this is what exactly this report has done. It has taken the figures of the net national income per capita, computed the growth rates using the current values. It's not that some investigative journalist could have made this report. The way it has been done, it has to come from some bright Babu sitting in the Ministry of Finance who would have got this bright idea. Now, it's not that he or she didn't know what they are doing. They are bright enough to know what they are doing. So, all I can conclude is that this was done deliberately to mislead the general public and then build up the image of the Modi government. Further, I'll read one paragraph from this report. I'm here referring to livemint.com. You can refer any other online magazine. The para states, according to the National Statistics Office data, per capita income in terms of net national income in current prices, I'm repeating, in current prices, stood at 1,72,000 in 22-23, with a growth rate of 15.8% over the previous year. Also, you note that the final figures for 22-23 are yet to be released. So there is here an assumption that this year this figure will grow at 15.8%, which in itself is a huge growth rate. The last line says this would nearly double 86,647 in 2014-15. Just remember this figure of 86,647. Now let me refer to the RBI report for the year 2020-21. In this report, you will find data for the year 2014-15. Now this report in table 1 has the macroeconomic aggregates for several parameters. It has the GDP given here, it has the net domestic product, gross national income, net national income, and so on for the year till 2020-21. In the end, the report also gives the per capita GDP for 5 of these parameters. Now here you will find this figure of 86,647, and if you look it up here, it's at current prices. So this figure has been taken, while in the report, right in the table 2, you have all the same parameters but at constant prices, and should you had to report this parameter, you should have actually taken 72,805, because you are going to compare the values. I have taken all these parameters from the RBI's different reports and put them all into a single Excel sheet. The blue rows here represent the current values: GDP current per capita, gross national income per capita, net national income per capita. That's the one under consideration, where 86,647 in 2014-15, that's given here. And then the pink rows are the values, in the same values as a constant factor. Now, since 22-23, none of the values are available. Someone has computed this figure of 173,706, giving a 15.8% growth rate of over the previous year. And the reason is quite apparent. If you compute by how many times this has grown between 2014 and 2022, here's the multiplication factor. And this is the only one where exactly the numbers fit a double growth, which means the value has exactly doubled in the last 8 years. None of the other parameters are anywhere close to 2. In fact, the ones which are the constant, which actually give you the growth rate, if you see the GDP at constant rate per capita has only grown by 30% over the last 7 or 8 years. So this was the truth behind the story of the per capita net national income doubling during the Modi period. Now, I know many of you will not have time to regularly go and do this kind of analysis. Should you be interested to see more such stories, follow me on my YouTube channel, What Does This Data Say, where I keep bringing out programs regularly where I analyze government data to get to the bottom of the truth. Thank you for watching this episode. If you liked this episode, just give a thumbs up, share the episode with your friends, and do subscribe to my channel. I'll see you again next week with some more interesting data. Till then, goodbye and namaskar.